Good morning, Boker Tov. Happy New Year. Fervent wishes that the year now upon us brings us and our loved ones health and happiness and fulfillment. Friends, I want to begin my remarks this morning with a confession. At 1 o'clock yesterday afternoon, I still did not have a sermon for today. Not only that, I didn't even have an idea for a sermon. Oh, I had ideas. 2 extensive drafts were written on 2 very different subjects. But when I looked at those drafts, I realized that neither of them had any life to them at all. So I abandoned them both. And then I thrashed around for a viable topic. Shall I talk about the sorry state of our politics at this time, with different groups at each other's throats, with the rhetoric at such a high pitch that saner voices can hardly be heard? Or should I talk about the embarrassing and frightening set of speeches the day before yesterday, as hundreds of military brass flown at enormous cost from all corners of the earth, only to be lectured to and condescended by the President and the Secretary of State? Or shall I talk about the seemingly unsolvable situation in the Middle East, as enemies lock horns in what seems like an interminable slaughter and political stalemate? But though all these issues are important and worthy of detailed consideration, I couldn't help but feel that on these days of awe, what we require is something else, something other than the numbing rehearsal of these admittedly pressing issues of the moment. What these days require, I sensed, is some kind of reflection on the dilemmas that we actually can resolve, issues that emerge from our own daily lives. And I was reminded of a comment made by the founder of the late 19th century Musar Jewish ethical and spiritual movement, a comment by its leader, Rabbi Israel Salanter. Here is what he wrote, and I quote, "I first wanted to change the world, but I found it too hard. So I tried to change my city, but I couldn't do that. So I tried to change my family. I realized at long last that I could only change myself." And perhaps you will be struck, as I was, by a response to Rabbi Salanter, from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. And here's what he says. "Ironically, it is precisely the act of self-repair that attunes us to assisting others and to changing the world." And so, having discarded 2 drafts and a myriad of stillborn ideas, I thought it best to talk about ourselves and the challenges we face on this holiest day of the year. A kind of analysis of our capacities, our opportunities, and the challenges we face. And then the second paragraph of the famous Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our ancestors, popped unbidden into my head. Here it is. Moses received Torah at Sinai and handed it down to Joshua. Then Joshua handed it to the elders, and the elders to the prophets, and the prophets handed it down to the men of the great assembly. One of them, Shimon HaTzadik, Simeon the Just, used to say, the world is based on 3 principles: on Torah, on worship, and on kindness. That is, on Torah, the fundamentals. On worship, the fundamentals prayed, and how we treat others. In other words, Torah, worship, kindliness. That triad of ideas, I thought to myself, is now what I really want to talk about. Big concepts, rich in meaning and implication, something I could really wrap my head around, and hopefully your head as well. Now I thought, this at last is a rich gold mine for contemplation. And I began to set my mind to the task. It was the final hours before my sermon delivery time, but I had my topic. And just as I was beginning to gather materials from our literary sources, the phone rang in the other room. And before I could get to it, the caller had hung up. But soon, I saw that he had left a voicemail message, which I hastily picked up. It was from a longtime dear friend who began his message by apologizing. I know that this is an exceedingly busy time for you, and so I am reluctant to ask something of you. But, the voice continued, I'm facing several serious issues at the moment, and I really need to talk to you. And then my friend concluded, but it's not an urgent crisis, and so call me when you can, not now, but soon. And as I put the phone down, I asked myself, what should I do? My friend had given me an out, not now, but soon. And so I will call him back, and I'll tell him that I'll be glad to talk with him right after the holidays. After all, I reasoned to myself, or was it a rationalization? Hundreds of people are counting on me not to stumble my way through the most important day of the year. I'll call him and I'll tell him I have plenty of time the day after tomorrow. And then I remembered Rabbi Shimon's admonition. The world depends on deeds of loving kindness, something I've been actually teaching now for several decades. And all of a sudden, the imperative power and the immediacy of this assertion hit me with a raw force. And I went back to that Pirkei Avot passage with new eyes. The world stands on Torah wisdom. Yes, that is true. And on worship, the opportunity to feel the power of that wisdom in our prayers. Yes, that's true too. But thirdly, and climactically, as if the third item was the deepest goal of Torah and wisdom, deeds of loving kindness, be helpful and kind to others. And all of a sudden, those words sprung to life and were no longer simply words on a page or ideas to be considered. I felt at that moment personally addressed by these words, as if for the first time they were meant specifically for me. And then I knew what I had to do. And so immediately I called my friend and said, yes, of course, I can come to you right now, with a little voice whispering to me in the back of my mind, but what about that sermon? And so I went to see this person and sat with him the better part of 2 hours to help him struggle with his crisis. After I returned home, I did write this sermon, sobered and clear-eyed about what I needed to say. And I knew one more thing, that the primary audience of an authentic sermon is the sermon writer, him or herself. If we sermonizers are not speaking to ourselves and wrestling with our own dilemmas and our own comments, then a certain authenticity will be missing. If we sermonizers are not speaking to ourselves, though not, of course, only to ourselves, we are missing the opportunity to wrestle with what we need to know, with what we need to feel, with how we need to act. And my experience with my friend has led me to look back to the wisdom of our Jewish tradition and ask, what are my primary obligations? And now, as if for the first time, I read those sources with new eyes and with deepened understanding. We have several obligations, to be sure, and they all are significant to the well-being of our lives. We must do the best that we can with the myriad of obligations with which we are confronted. But when all is said and done, the essential legacy that has come down to us from our past is a vibrant and spiritual vocabulary that urges us to a certain way of life and to put the most important things front and center. Love. Love your neighbor and the stranger. Respect. Respect your parents, even when they are gone, and your teachers. Be a friend, for friends are one of life's most powerful consolations. Lead with loving kindness. Do not gossip. Do not put a stumbling block before the blind. Do not be vengeful or harbor grudges. Deal with the tensions that we have with another by facing that person with honesty, with humility, and with grace. Give others the benefit of the doubt and try to see them through the lens of their best selves. When you and a friend are having an argument over who is to blame for what has happened, try at the beginning to see both of you as equally responsible, and then at the end to see both of you as equally innocent. Be careful with your words when you speak with another. Have confidence in who you are, but also hold high the dignity of the other person. In sum, how you practice your values is more important than thinking about them. Why so many imperatives? Why so much advice? Because how we treat each other is ultimately the most important thing of all. Now, of course, we all have many pressing concerns and many substantial obligations. Many pressures can sap our energies and make us gruff. We can't always get a good night's sleep so as to be able to face tomorrow with our best selves. These indeed are the realities of our lives. But on this day of all days, let us resolve to be kind to one another and to put this at the head of our obligations. And so I want to conclude these remarks with a story about our Rabbi Israel Salanter. It is told that he and some of his students were on a multi-day journey to find just the right bakery to prepare matzah for Passover. And so, being yeshiva students and having studied the laws of Passover, they often fell into conversation about the various laws and the various stringencies that must be observed to ensure that the matzah was strictly kosher for Pesach. And so at one point, they turned to their rabbi for clarification. Should we, they asked, prioritize this law, or should we focus on that law? To which Rabbi Salanter replied, an elderly widow works at the bakery. Be careful not to hurt her feelings.